Welcome, everyone, to Sunday morning at the Marxist Library. A quick note before we start, this session is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube with a link on our website, ICSSmarx.org, within the next few days. For over a decade and a half, our sessions were held at the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library located in Oakland, California. We now host our sessions on Zoom and have speakers and attendees from throughout the United States and throughout the world. My name is Alan Miller, and I will be hosting this meeting. I'm a member of the program committee that organizes Sunday mornings at the Marxist Library, and I would like to start off by saying that we always welcome input, feedback, suggestions for topics and speakers. You can contact us through our website at ICSSmarx.org on the contact form. Before we start, we wish to remind everyone that this is a comradely forum for political discourse and debate. As such, we ask that you show respect to other participants and the moderator of today's session. Also, please note that the opinions expressed today are those of the speaker and participants. They do not necessarily represent the ICSS or the Marxist Library. We have a very special speaker today, Dae-Han Song, all the way from South Korea. And by the way, it is now about 2:30 in the morning in South Korea. So we want to express a special thank you to Dae-Han for staying up to talk to us. We're getting sort of a real-time live appearance in the middle of the night. He's going to be giving us an update on recent events on the Korean Peninsula. The title of his talk is Peace with North Korea, Peace in Northeast Asia. And just a quick introduction, Dae-Han joined the peace and reunification movement in 2003 when US bombs fell over Baghdad. He joined the East Bay Korean Americans for Peace to prevent preemptive attack against North Korea. He has organized the API Youth Promoting Advocacy and Leadership in Oakland, so he's actually familiar with the Bay Area, and the Labor Community Strategy Center and Bus Riders Union in Los Angeles. A founding member, he's a head of the contents team in the International Strategy Center in Seoul, and he is also part of the No Cold War Collective. So please join me in welcoming our speaker, Dae-Han, from South Korea, 2:30 in the morning. So we really appreciate your being with us this morning. It's morning for us too. So thank you, Dae-Han. So why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Great. Thank you. Here, let me share presentation and prepare. Yeah, so hold on, just give me a quick second. Let me set up here a little bit. Yeah, so as Alan said, my name is Dae-Han Song. Thank you for having me today. I'm from an organization called the International Strategy Center, and we're located here in Seoul, South Korea. And the focus of our work is around peace in the Korean Peninsula, but also trying to expand and looking at it within the context of peace in Northeast Asia, because of course the two are inextricably connected. And I'll skip over my brief introduction, but I guess my introduction, since Alan already gave it. But I guess I wanted to just mention that I think somebody asked how I came to this forum, and it's through Paul Liam, who I know that he was also a previous speaker here, and he was very much a part of my own politicization and just getting involved in the peace and reunification movement in Korea, in the United States back then. So today, the United States containment of China, its policy is turning Northeast Asia into tinderbox, right? The U.S. attempts to assert its military dominance in the region, is testing and pushing the limits of regional stability. And as y'all probably know, we have in the region two hotspots, right? We have the Taiwan Strait and the Korean Peninsula. And today I'm going to be focused on the changing situation in the Korean Peninsula. At the beginning of the year, North Korea made headlines when in its New Year's speech, Chairman Kim Jong-un suggested removing from the North Korean constitution the term 80 million compatriots that referred to the totality of South and North Koreans, basically saying South and North Koreans would no longer be considered compatriots, right? He also suggested the removal of independence, peaceful unification, and great national unity. Right. And then furthermore, he stated that the Republic of Korea should be viewed as the primary enemy, and even said that if war were to break out, the North Korea would work towards occupying, subjugating, and reclaiming the Republic of Korea, right? So, in fact, these are like alarming words, and they sparked longtime North Korea experts Robert Carlin and Siegfried Hecker to write an article titled "Is Kim Jong-un Preparing for War?" So then, what then is the significance of this moment? Um, so it's important to note that the New Year's address explicitly mentioned that North Korea had no intention of preemptive attack, right? Furthermore, if you actually read the New Year's address, most of it was focused on the quote unquote supreme task to stabilize and improve the people's living as early as possible. So these are not quite the words of somebody that is preparing its population for war, right? For immediate war, right? Nonetheless, these words do mark a break with North Korea's 30 plus year active pursuit of peaceful reunification with South Korea. So, in short, war is not around the corner, but it is definitely on the horizon. So, how did we get here? I think there are three important factors that have led us to the present moment. One is the continuous breakdown in US North Korea peace negotiations. Two is the inability of South Korea to independently pursue peaceful unification, given the great influence of the United States. And then it's finally the regional polarization that is sparked and fueled by the US policy of containing China and Russia that is informing North Korea's survival strategy today. So let's start with the failed US-North Korea peace negotiations. Let's try to understand why this has happened and why the United States and North Korea don't seem to be able to consolidate some sort of like peace treaty despite like a decades-long effort. Well, the process, of course, it had a lot of miscalculation by the different parties involved, which led to a lot of missteps and missed opportunities. I think ultimately the reason why the negotiations process failed was because while North Korea was pursuing peace and coexistence, the United States is actually seeking not peace with North Korea, but simply the disarmament of North Korea. So there's quite a difference, right? I think there was Robin Carlin and John Lewis. They're like North Korean experts, and they wrote a book about a lot of the negotiations that happened between the United States and North Korea. And effectively, they said that the best way for the United States to disarm North Korea was to show North Korea that it had a space or it had a space in the United States vision of Northeast Asia, right? That it could find a place within a place of coexistence, right? So to try to understand what the peace process looked like, one important element is understanding um, North Korea's paradoxical pursuit of peace through nuclear weapons, right? And I think this is a very important um, element that must be recognized if one is to try to understand why at times North Korea is pursuing nuclear weapons and at other times is pursuing like diplomacy and peace, right? And of course, the reason for this is that North Korea wanted to negotiate with the United States from a position of strength. So because of that, it pursued both diplomatic negotiations and the development of nuclear weapons, right? So this way, when for example, when the diplomatic process would stall, then North Korea could simply shift to the nuclear track, right? And of course, this would also have the added benefit that it would pressure the United States to return to the diplomatic process, right? So in short, North Korea is able to guarantee its security either through peace, through some sort of peace treaty or peace assurances, or through nuclear deterrence. And I would say one of the most fruitful periods in the US North Korea peace negotiations happened during the Clinton administration. And a lot of this is because it recognized North Korea's security concerns, right? Uh, I'm sure that many of you already know, but in 1994, there was the possibility of uh, Bill Clinton was contemplating like surgical strikes against North Korean nuclear facilities, and realizing that this would trigger a war that would kill like 1 million people, basically decided not to. And there was a process between North Korea and the United States, a negotiation process, talks that happened, mediated by former President Jimmy Carter, that managed to achieve the 1994 agreed framework. And basically, the framework was pursuing the normalization of diplomatic and economic relations between North Korea and the United States. And it was within this framework that North Korea would dismantle its Yongbyon nuclear reactor, and the United States will replace it with two light water nuclear reactors that are much more difficult to weaponize. And it would provide heavy fuel during this transition period when North Korea is dismantling its nuclear reactor and deactivating it, and the United States is creating replacements for it, right? And despite the fact that the Clinton administration uh, was satisfied with North Korean compliance, the Clinton administration itself didn't fulfill its promises, right? Not only did it fail to provide formal security assurances, it was also unable to secure funding for the light water nuclear reactors, for the heavy fuel. A lot of it was because there was a Republican-dominated Congress at that time that was effectively waiting for North Korea to collapse under the weight of the situation that it was faced with, which was the fall of the socialist bloc, as well as the various natural disasters that were taking place in the mid 90s that was leading North Korea to famine. And in response to this kind of like stalling, North Korea shot a missile over Japanese territory, and of course, this restarted the conversation. And all of this led to the October 2000 joint communique, which promised to build a new relationship free from past enmity, right? And ultimately, while Clinton failed to normalize relations with North Korea, his approach that attempted to address North Korea's security concerns was effective, right? And basically, when the Clinton administration was transitioning, and basically like kind of like expressing like passing on the baton to the next administration, it had North Korea at the bottom of its like security risk, right? So it was that confident that a major breakthrough was going to happen, and that that there would be a process of denuclearization that would happen with North Korea. Of course, a lot of this changed when Bush came into power. Bush Jr., George W. Bush, right? His neoconservatives would sabotage and derail the 1994 agreed framework multiple times. And the first instance came after September 11, when Bush grouped North Korea as part of the axis of evil, right? And furthermore, Bush's nuclear posture review left open the possibility of targeting North Korea with the nuclear attack. Furthermore, based on suspicions that North Korea had developed a second path to the nuclear bomb through uranium enrichment, the Bush administration basically stops the heavy fuel shipments. And of course, this naturally leads North Korea to start the Yongbyon reactor. And by the time that George W. Bush finally comes back to the negotiating table, North Korea has switched to the nuclear track, and basically it went from having plutonium for at most one bomb to having enough for 4 to 5 bombs, right? So it tells you again and again we're gonna see the ineffectiveness of using pressure to try to force North Korea into submission, because it will just switch over to the nuclear track, right? And then in his second term, Bush attempted to restart engagement with North Korea, but this time through a multilateral approach. Yet immediately after finalizing the agreement, the U.S. ambassador at that time, Christopher Hill, he pushes the finish line further, right? Basically, all the agreement is all set and is ready to go, and then basically reads a letter that written by the hardline neocons from the Bush administration that basically call for intrusive inspections. They add human rights issues, and then they also add other like weapons programs even after the whole agreement is finished. And then, of course, soon after, the United States cuts North Korea's access to international banking by basically going around bank by bank and pressuring them to not do business with North Korea, right? So again, all these are not gestures towards peace and towards establishing relations and normalizing relations. As a result, North Korea reverts back to its nuclear development and carries out its first nuclear test. After the nuclear test, North Korea returns to the diplomatic track, right? Bush resumes the fuel shipment. North Korea blows up the cooling tower for the Yongbyon nuclear reactor. Again, there's like an agreement that is coming together, and again, the U.S. like moves the finish line, right? It not only adds the uranium program in addition to the plutonium one, it also asks for these invasive inspections. And then later in a speech, Bush Jr., George W. Bush basically demands that North Korea end its harsh rule and respect the dignity and human rights of its people. So again and again, we see that the United States is just zero in focus on the disarmament of North Korea, but in fact, its words and its actions go contrary to providing any sort of security that would actually accomplish denuclearization of North Korea. And now we come to the Obama administration, and the Obama administration punishes North Korea for a rocket launch that it did, despite North Korea's protest that it has a right to launch rockets into space, that it also has a right to space, right? Eventually, a leap day deal is reached in which North Korea will give up its uranium enrichment program. And of course, the difference between the uranium enrichment program and the plutonium one is that the uranium one is much easier to develop in secrecy, right? And basically, the North Korea says, we will give this up if the U.S. recommits to the October 2007 agreement. So this is also this is also important to note that North Korea's actions are not just simply driven by external factors, but also by internal ones, right? Because at this time, Chairman Kim Jong-il dies, Kim Jong-un takes power, and of course, there had already been like a chain of decisions and whatnot that had been decided when Kim Jong-il died, and basically Kim Jong-un goes ahead and launches a rocket to commemorate the centenary of Kim Il Sung's birthday, right? So in some regards, the process is not so simple, right? Because North Korea also has its own internal dynamics that it deals with. Obama pulls out of the deal, and then, of course, North Korea tests a uranium bomb. And then this triggers Obama to embark on strategic patience. And during the course of Obama's strategic patience, North Korea goes from having enough for a handful of plutonium bombs and develops much more its capability to 25 plutonium and uranium bombs and dozens of like successful missile tests. And of course, more recently, we know about Trump and how there was this kind of like flowering and this kind of like possibility that opened up, right? But at the beginning, of course, the Trump administration was marked by the exchange of insults and threats that happened between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. And then, of course, that shifted from trading insults to trading letters. And it kind of like started to establish a relationship. And South Korea's President Moon, he lays the path for talks, which include the Pyeongchang Olympics. And in order to pave the path towards these talks, North Korea carries out various gestures to show its desire to engage with talks with the United States. Like it blows up its nuclear test sites, and it places a moratorium on nuclear and missile testing. And the Singapore summit that happens affirms the desire for improved relations. And of course, now we come to the Hanoi summit, right? Basically, it's clear from like the memoirs of John Bolton and various memoirs and whatnot that basically Trump was John Bolton intervened and John Bolton, the person that had derailed the 1994 agreed framework under the Bush Jr. Under George W. Bush, again, like derails the talks in this moment, but basically advising Trump, saying that, look, you got all the time in the world. If you don't like the deal, you could just like walk away, right? So at the Hanoi summit, Trump asks for a full declaration of all of North Korea's weapons programs. Kim Jong-un says that, yes, we can do this, but we just can't do it right away, right? Because we have no diplomatic relations. There's 7 years of hostility, and we only have 8 months of this like personal relationships, right? So we could do it at some point, but we need assurances, right, before we do something like that. And of course, Trump walked away, and then the deal collapsed, right? So, in many ways, the collapse of the Hanoi summit marked a decisive shift in North Korea's approach to its foreign policy, right? But however, the question would then be, why is South Korea then like targeted? Why is it that why is it that North Korea is severing ties with South Korea, right? That it doesn't want to call it a compatriot, whatnot, right? And I think the immediate answer would be the Yoon Suk-yeol administration's anti-North Korea position, right? And if you look here, this is during his presidential campaign. He basically here it basically says something like North Korea is the main enemy, right? So in some ways, he was using this to mobilize his conservative base, his anti-North Korea conservative base, and of course, Yoon also has been a part of trying to push South Korea towards becoming a pivot, becoming a man, the word escapes me, but becoming like a crucial piece of U.S. Security architecture in the region and globally, right? And of course, this is the photo is of the Camp David, Spirit of Camp David agreement that happened in 2023. Um, oh, it was the linchpin, right? It wants to become like a linchpin in U.S. security architecture. But however, it's important to note that the criticism wasn't simply just about Yoon, but it was also pointing out the limitations of South Korea's liberals, right? Who often simply stood cheering on the sidelines and who had passively pursued peaceful reunification, but it was not a peaceful reunification through coexistence, but it was through economic absorption. It was basically the idea that South Korea would absorb North Korea, given South Korea's larger economy, larger, more powerful economy. And of course, this is clear by the fact that none of the liberal administrations attempted to address the 1987 Constitution of the Republic of Korea, which states that reunification would happen under a liberal democracy, right? Not like coexistence, but under liberal democracy, and that the whole of the Korean Peninsula is considered a part of the Republic of Korea, right? And even at the heyday of peaceful reunification under the Kim Dae-jung administration, the Sunshine Policy was ultimately based on inducing North Korea to open itself up to the rest of the world, right? So the Sunshine Policy gets its name from Aesop's fable, an Aesop fable where the wind and the sun are both competing, trying to they put on a wager to see who is the stronger one, and the challenge is to make the man take off his coat, right? And of course, the wind blows, and the way the man just holds on tighter to his coat, and then the sun wins by like just radiating more and more heat, and in the process, having the man take off the coat by out of his own volition, right? So this is kind of like this also speaks to opening up North Korea, like changing it of its own volition, right? So yeah, even at the heyday of rapprochement and whatnot. So I guess if we wanted to understand why this is, I don't think it's just it's just I think it has to do something much deeper. It has to do with something much structural and historical in South Korea. And as many of you here probably know, there was no cultural, social, or even economic basis for the existence of two separate states in the Korean Peninsula. Both states emerged out of the arbitrary division of the peninsula by the United States. North and South existed as two separate states uh, for as two separate divided for 5 years and as two separate states for like 2 years before war broke out, right? So clearly not a civil war in the way that people think of the civil war in the United States between the North and the South, right? It was a civil war much the way that the Vietnam War was. And South Korea, of course, was birthed and raised by the United States. And I could talk about this in greater detail, but I imagine that people might already be familiar with it. If you look at this picture, when the United States came in, right, they lowered the Japanese flag and then they raised the American one, right? The idea was not for Korean people to rule themselves, but the U.S. military government was like, we are the first decree by General MacArthur was we are the government and nothing else. Like uh, nothing else is legitimate, right? Despite the fact that there were like grassroots uh, grassroots people's committees that they had all come together in like a preparatory committee. Despite all of these kind of like democratic yearnings and democratic structures that were sprouting up after independence, right? And despite the democratization movements that South Korea has had, is yet to overcome this structural dependence on the United States, right? Is yet to overcome the heavy anti-communism or yeah. And so how do we know this? Because to this day, we have a national security law that prevents true and open public debate. And I guess one other thing that I wanted to say is that a lot of people simply take for granted North Korea being part of the Russia and China camp, right? People just think, oh, they just think, oh, North Korea was always like friendly with China. It was always like it's just how it's always been. It just makes sense. But I think when people make those assumptions, they fail to understand that North Korea is fiercely independent, often, and at different moments, even at the height of the Cold War, it risked cutting ties with both countries, both China and the Soviet Union at that time, to maintain its independence, right? Um, and that there were also ebbs and flows to the relationship between uh, the Soviet Union and North Korea, and between China and North Korea, following the collapse of the socialist camp, right? So the point, I guess, is that it is not just North Korea, that this is just natural, but it's more that North Korea is being pushed uh, to this because of the U.S. Because the U.S. is effectively raising the temperature in Northeast Asia through its uh, policy of containing China. I think if there's like one lesson that we can draw from the failed negotiations for peace is that, like, one, uh, the problem is inextricably linked tied to regional peace, and two, is that peace is not a given, but it's something that must be fought for, right? The abolitionist Frederick Douglass stated that power concedes nothing without a demand. And so I think it's important to come up with these demands, right? In Korea, I think there are perhaps one can understand the peace movement as being kind of like broken into two parts. One is the focus is on peace in much more general as a general concept, and then uh, one that understands reunification in much more of a localized context, right? And in some regards, uh, at this point in time, it's important for both of these movements to overcome their limitations and synthesize both approaches, right? One approach towards peace in general, and in particular, like regional peace, and another one around peace in particular in the Korean Peninsula, right? So um, I've attempted to, in order to kind of like jumpstart this conversation, um, I I have written an article, and as part of this article, I've included like possible demands that social and peace movements in Korea could build around, or could even just like have a discussion around. And of course, the first one is opposing the USFK and the ROK war games, because these have all, when these war games are paused and whatnot, it always opens great like avenue for like um diplomatic windows, right? Diplomatic opportunities. And of course, these war games are highly threatening to North Korea, right? In effect, like it stops, like I think that the North Korean military plays a large role in construction. And basically, when these war games happen, the full military has to be mobilized. And when that happens, basically all construction in North Korea like stops, right? Uh, or I think kind of like what was interesting is that there was a CSIS report about like different war game scenarios around Taiwan. And it was just interesting because one of the things that it said was, in this kind of weird moment of like strategic empathy, it basically said that if an invasion of Taiwan happens by China, that it might happen in the form of a war game, right, or a military exercise that might turn into an invasion. And if you could think of that as regards to China and Taiwan, This definitely applies to North Korea and the United States. When you have hundreds of thousands of troops being mobilized close to North Korea, that are carrying out like decapitation exercises of the North Korea leadership, whatever, right? Another important demand is like regaining wartime operational control. As many of you probably know, like right now, South Korea uh, only has peacetime operational control of its military. Regaining this would basically give it greater autonomy of its own military, and perhaps even like negotiating around these like war games, right? Another one would be dismantling the Japan, Korea, US security cooperation. Because when you have these kind of like regional alliances that are forming that create two opposing camps, this just creates tensions that just escalate the possibility of miscalculations or whatnot, leading to conflict and leading to war. And finally, I think one of the most important things is that a lot of these demands are to some degree abstract and intellectual, but they only become real when we are actually supporting struggles that are happening in Taiwan, in the Korean Peninsula, in the Philippines, in Okinawa, and Hawaii. There are different like struggles by people that are directly impacted by these by whether it's like the war games or whether it's U.S. military bases, whether it's yeah, what or whether it's some sort of like U.S. military installation. A lot of these things have an immediate impact upon the people around it, and these people become politicized in this process to want to fight for like peace. Um, so yeah, just being able to not just speak of a peace and the need for it and anti-militarization in an abstract way, but in a more concrete way that is grounded in actual struggles. For example, that's one of the reasons why in May 16th to the 19th, I'll be going to Okinawa to partake in the Peace March that happens every year or on May 15th, which is the anniversary of the return of Okinawa to Japan from the U.S. military government. So basically that kind of makes up the bulk of my presentation. Thank you for listening to me, and yeah, I look forward to the discussion and to your questions.
Okay, thank you, Dae-Han. Much appreciated. What we're going to do now is take a short break for announcements, and we'll return with questions and answers from participants. If you have a question or want to make a comment, go to the bottom of your Zoom window and there's a reactions button and raise your hand, and we'll call on people. We'll try to get everybody in to ask your questions. And we'll start shortly. Want to make a few quick announcements. Next week, our program is, there've been some last minute changes. What we're going to ask everybody to do is to go to our website and sign up for email notifications at ICSSmarks.org. And also watch the website. We will have more information about next week's program posted on there shortly. On May 12th, we're going to have a representative from Jewish Voices for Peace speaking. Most of you are aware of, well, everybody here probably is aware of the Palestine struggle and demonstrations that are going on in campuses across the country. And JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace, is playing an important role in those demonstrations. We're going to have a speaker to talk about that. And then on Sunday, May 19th, we have a special program. Danny Shaw from CUNY, City University of New York, will be speaking. Danny has spoken on Sunday morning at the Marxist Library several times. He's a professor at CUNY in New York, and he was recently fired from his position. He's been there 17 years for speaking out in support of the Palestine. So this is a very important presentation. We want everybody to come back. There's also on our email announcements a link to sign up to sign a petition demanding that the CUNY administration rehires Danny. So we're going to get a frontline report back from him as far as what's going on in his case and the case of other faculty. There have been several who've been fired as a result of participating in the pro-Palestine movement, supporting students. So those are upcoming programs. I want to call your attention to the fact that you can always go to our website at ICSSmarks.org. And up there we have links to all of our past programs for the past, I don't know how many years, to YouTube, where you can actually view past programs on a variety of topics. We also have announcements for future programs, and we have a contact form where you can contact us if you have questions, comments, or wish to make a suggestion for future programs. So ICSSmarks.org. So what we're going to do now is we're going to switch over to getting questions and answers from the audience. And we have quite a few people that have raised their hand. And let me start off with Raj, followed by Rich Johnson. So Raj, if you would unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
I'm unmuted, yeah. Thanks very much, and thank you for staying up that late at night. We discussed shifting the program, but we thought it'd be very difficult with all the audience that's used to Sunday morning. Thank you. So I visited South Korea in 1981, and I saw the conditions. The economy was fine, and a lot of construction was going on, and everybody there was working long hours. Nobody was working less than 70 hours from what I could see. I also saw in South Korea prostitution being practiced openly, okay? And people were very much anti-North, you know, when the construction, the people, I was at Hyundai Fabrication Steel. So there was this jingoistic sense, but it all changed later on. And now you've described what has gone on. The United States cannot be trusted. Everybody knows that. And it's really important that North Koreans following Stalin understand that. Imperialism does not change color. And so I don't think this problem will be solved until the United States itself is defeated as an imperialist power. And I think the struggle should go on, but that's my sense about Western colonialism, that imperialism that turned into financial imperialism with military boots on your neck. And it's terrible what they've done to the people of Korea. So my question to you was, what do you think was Trump's motivation in luring North Korea? Was he, in your judgment, genuine, or was he just playing just like the other presidents to have a different approach, like Bill Clinton had a different approach? But I really don't trust any American president would have wanted anything other than complete submission of North Korea to its dictate. So I would like your comments on that, because I don't see United States changing its colors until it is forced to do it. So
I think there's like a couple of aspects. I think some people say that Trump kind of has less of this like neocon and more of this kind of realist perspective of politics, kind of like Kissinger and whatnot. And in that regard, he kind of like just maybe was like a little bit less ideological in how it engaged with North Korea. And I think that that's what allowed him like some flexibility to be able to get that far. But I think the more interesting question is not so much like what prompted Trump, but how easy it was for Trump to not follow through, right? I think maybe that's the more important question. Like, why is it so damn easy for him to just like basically jerk everybody around and at the last minute just be like, oh, you know what? I'm walking away from this thing. And the reason why is because the United States is holding all the cards. The reason why was because all the Moon Jae-in administration was doing was just like cheering from the side, like applauding and just hoping that somehow it will work out, right? There was no, like you said, there is no, like the United States is not gonna just do it on its own. It needs to be compelled to do so, right? And to do that, you need like a South Korean movement that is strong, right? You need, uh, I mean, at this point, it's just very hard to imagine, but like, yeah, you would need a South Korean movement that is very strong. You would need a US movement that is strong. You would need a regional movement that is strong, right? Like the United States needs, like, it's not just, like you said, it's not just going to happen on its own, right? Like somebody needs to twist the arm, right? And to do that, you have to build power, right? You have to build these movements, right? So, I mean, it's a bit of an abstract answer, but yeah, I guess that's the only answer that I got.
Thank you.
Okay, next is Rich Johnson, followed by Richard Wright. So Rich Johnson, please unmute. Rich,
Trying to unmute myself.
there you go. We hear you.
Either so. I love this program today. I just want to start with, because I couldn't get in right before we started the program, to say I can't say your name, the Korean name, but anyway, I was in Korea, in South Korea. I think Raj says 1981. I was there in 1961, and 8 years after the Korean War was over, or not really over, but stalled, and same, I think, I was also in Japan, and the Japan's economy was hopping. I mean, it was burning. It was really intense. And then when I got to South Korea, and we got at the in Seoul, it was changing, but much slower. Well, it was the Korean War, not the World War II. The Japanese had another few years there to get ready, so to rebuild. And so I just wanted to mention that, and also that I want to state something that kind of seems like out of hand, but it's right on the button, I think. And that is, I want to quote Ho Chi Minh, and then just make a one-line comparison between what's going on in South Korea, in Korea in general, and Vietnam, and the split in Korea, like the split in Vietnam, which I think was manufactured or a function of history in a weird way. But Ho Chi Minh said, most famous quote that I know was, nothing is more precious than independence and freedom. And also, I don't believe you mentioned that after the war, after the U.S. pulled out in 1953, there was no actual peace agreement signed. So we're still technically, if I understand it right, at war with Korea. Maybe that's the wrong way to say it, but I don't think you mentioned it at all. I think it's very important because not having finished that with a proper peace agreement, treaty signed by both sides, a lot of weird stuff can go on, and has for ever since. So here's my question. Could you speak very briefly to the Kim Il-sung's Juche program that he left us with, left the Koreans with, the three main points of Juche? Maybe people never talk about it. To me, it still rules the attitude of North Korea, and it's clear. And like Ho Chi Minh said, nothing's more precious than independence and freedom. And I think the Juche point speaks to it. Thank you.
I actually do not know very much about the Juche ideology. All I know is kind of like it's its emphasis on independence and self-determination, and the notion that the reason why Korea was colonized by Japan, and basically was this notion of like flunkyism, I guess. Flunkyism meaning like South Korea being kind of like seeing China as like the older brother. A lot of this kind of like lack of your own what is it, independence, your own strength, that a lot of that is the reasons why Korea was under foreign domination at various moments. That's about how much I know. Yes, you're totally right that I didn't mention the that yes, the Korean War is not technically over. It's just an armistice agreement. I guess part of it is that I'm so what is it? I'm so steeped in that in Korea that I didn't realize to bring that up. It was just kind of like it was already an assumed point, I suppose. But yes, there is no peace agreement. There was just a ceasefire, and that ceasefire has just lasted for like from 1953 till today. You know, it's the war is not over. Yeah, you're totally right.
Okay, Richard Wright, if you would unmute, please.
Yay, I figured out how to unmute. Ow. One of the questions I had, you didn't mention it at all, is that the Korean, the South Korean in particular, trade union movement used to be very, very strong and very vigorous and very, I wouldn't exactly call it necessarily pro-North Korean, but pro-reconciliation. And I haven't heard anything lately out of the labor movements there. Could you maybe elaborate on what's going on South Korea labor movements? Thank you very much.
I would say that um uh I guess first of all, I don't know a whole lot. I guess one thing. The other thing to perhaps having said that, I think that in many regards there were a lot of the peace and reunification movement in Korea is not very strong, right? Like reunification is still like a strong demand among like labor unions, is taught among labor unions as part of political education, all that stuff. But as regards to just kind of like the general wider public, as I said, there's a national security law, and that makes open public debate not possible, right? And it's that it constrains the battle of ideas, as they say, right? And because of that, peace reunification is not necessarily like in people's minds, right? In people's minds, more is like, it's not to say that that anxiety, that kind of like mental load is not there. It is there for sure. Like, but and it manifests in different ways. But I think a lot of people are like more concerned about kind of like their daily living, how am I gonna like get a job, or a lot of these things that come with not having like a booming economy and being in stagnation and stagflation. Yeah, I guess, and I think a lot of the issues also happened with um the different schisms that happen within the progressive movement and progressive political parties, that made it where progressive political parties have become fairly marginalized from like political discourse. Yeah. Sorry, it's not a very good answer, but yeah.
Okay, next is Mehmet, followed by Richard F. So Mehmet, if you would please unmute.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for a good presentation. A couple of things. I'm going to be concentrating on the North Korea. I have visited both the South and the North, and the economy in the North was struggling. What do you think keeps its economy going and continuing? And the question that comes up again with the unification is that North Korea, as I understand, has declared that unification is no longer on the table. What does that mean for the South and the North? Why is that being abandoned? If you can please address those. Thank you so much again for the good presentation.
Sure. I think I left out a lot of different aspects of it, and I think for example, if you look at so the January 15th statement said that hey, South Korea is no longer a suitable counterpart for peaceful reunification, right? But if you look at the December, there was another speech that he gave, December 2023, and in that speech he makes a little bit more clear exactly what is meant by that, right? And basically says look, South Korea considers us the main enemy, right? South Korea has always sought reunification through absorption, right? South Korea is like a pawn of the United States, right? So it basically brings up these three things, right? So if those three things are the reasons for cutting ties for peaceful reunification, then in some ways they could also be the prerequisites for reinstating it, right? So it is talking about a South Korea that actually has much more autonomy when dealing with North Korea, right? It's talking about South Korea that does not have a hostile policy towards North Korea as the Yoon administration does at the moment, right? So I think if anything is clear about North Korea is that it's I guess not to say that this moment is not significant, but it is also to say that if anything, I feel like North Korea is a fairly flexible country, is very tactically and strategically flexible. And in that regard, I imagine that if the conditions change, then their approach would also change. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, I've seen just things, people write and people say, hey, look, North Korea said that they're not wanting peaceful unification because of these three reasons. Then it stands to reason because oftentimes North Korea, what they say is very important in how they say it, right? Because they're very careful with the words that they choose. Everything is very deliberate, right? So oftentimes the key to unlocking the problem is in the statement. And I would say that if these three things is what leads North Korea to this policy, then for example, having a different administration that perhaps doesn't have a hostile policy toward North Korea, like the Yoon administration does, would de-escalate things, right? If South Korean social movements become much stronger, right, and are able to fight for greater autonomy for South Korea, then that would also shift things. So I don't think it's not something that is forget it, it's a done deal. It's not like that, right? It's reversible, but it's not easy. It's not easy to reverse, right? And it is a big move also.
Okay, I just want to remind everybody, if you have any questions or comments, go to the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and raise your hand. Next up is Richard F. So
Yeah,
Richard,
thank you.
go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. My impression is that South Korea has thrown its lot in with the U.S. empire, the stagnant U.S. empire, even more than Japan. And relative to North Korea, which seems to be opening up to China and Russia, South Korea seems to be heading towards the same stagnation as the the U.S. itself. I wonder if you see signs, if there are signs of that, the impact of that decision by the South Korean ruling class to, hitch its wagon to this failing empire. You mentioned stagflation. I wonder if you could expand on that a little. Thank you.
Sure. I mean, I think let's see. I think what's interesting is that the Yun administration, like the support ratings is like really low, right? Like something like 23%, which is like literally like it's the diehard conservatives that basically are like still his support base that remain, right? And in the previous in the just recent election that happened for the National Assembly, the Democratic Party, the opposition party to the conservatives, the liberals, they won like by a landslide, right? And they won not because people love them. People in fact hate them too, but they just hate Yoon that much more, right? So in much the way that like in the United States, sometimes people vote for Biden despite hating the guy, but they vote for him because they hate Trump more, right? Something like that, right? So there's that aspect. And I think that speaks to the inability of progressives to rise to the occasion, and that's for historical reasons, but also for like for whatever reasons they have not been able to excite people with the vision that they offer that will make people like support them and vote for them, whatnot. Uh, I guess as regards to um, I would say like the liberals have a slightly different approach than the conservatives because their approach is more around like balancing between China and the United States. But at the same time, the structural limitations is not just something that a liberal government can just overcome on its own. There has to be like a movement or a swelling from below to push it away from this kind of like dependence upon the United States. Um, as regards to stagflation, I mean, yeah, I think I don't know, like most of Korean products are based have a huge input of imports, and as such, with the strengthening of the dollar, it's just like shooting up prices, while the growth rate is not very high, and yeah, people's wages aren't going up, but definitely the prices are going up. And they're not coming down, when the oil or whatever prices drop, things don't drop, they just stay put, right? Um, I guess so your answer being that uh that South Korea has kind of like hitched this lot with the United States. Yes, I would say it's true, but I would say that's also because of the current conservative government, and that government is not wildly is very highly unpopular. Um, so, and I think nobody in Korea, like the Korean public, does not think the solution just lies with throwing your full lot with the United States because it understands South Korea's economic dependence on China's economy, right? So I think most people have a much more pragmatic approach of trying to navigate both uh, China and the United States. But it is the Yoon administration that has thrown his full lot with the United States. But like it was very interesting. Recently, there was somebody that said, "Young people don't vote for us, and the old people that vote for us, they're dying because most of the conservative base are people that lived through the Korean War, and through a lot of this anti-communist indoctrination." So a lot of these older people are dying, and basically our support base is dying off, and maybe like the next election, like if we don't win over young people, then we're gonna be in big trouble. So, yeah.
Okay, next is Gene, if you would unmute.
Okay, well, thanks so much for your talk. I really appreciate your examination of this, and I'm trying to grapple with what's going on in Korea. I have never been to Korea myself. I did spend 2 years in Japan, and understand there's a very strong well, peace movement as well as an anti-war, anti-nuke movement in Japan, and as well. And Japan did part of its constitution renounced war. Will never maintain the right of war against any other nation. But then, of course, they developed their self-defense forces, which are, a major military power in the world. But I guess part of my question or comment focuses on Taiwan, because I have relatives that live in Taiwan, and that, I see, China cannot threaten to invade Taiwan because Taiwan is part of China. And it's like, United States can't invade Florida, although some of us feel it might be a good idea. But nevertheless, this one China policy is universally recognized by the United Nations, United States, every country in Asia and Europe. And so, China is not a threat to either a threat in Asia or world peace. I think I tend to see it more as a part of the movement towards world peace. But I just, those are my views. I think I've pushed this view within Vets for Peace, but I'd just like to know your comments on that, and particularly with Taiwan, but China in general. Thank you.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think my understanding is that yes, there is the US, the UN, like everybody recognizes the one China policy, and historically it's also one China, right? And of course it was like US intervention that prevented the completion of the Chinese Civil War, right? And basically it was the US protection and the San Francisco treaties and basically the San Francisco system that kind of like drew a schism across the Taiwan Strait and across the Korean Peninsula, right? And maintained it, right? But I do think that there is this, like Taiwan did become its for for however many years, what I think like 60 or whatever years, like it remained separate, and it grew to be to have its own whatever systems, cultures, whatnot. I think so in that regard, I guess like ultimately my view is that a peaceful resolution between China and Taiwan, one that is based on respect or mutual respect and without interference of other countries, is like I would say the best possible solution. And I imagine the only practical solution, I imagine that even China understands that, right? So yeah, I guess that's kind of my perspective on it.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think, during the period of occupation, all Taiwanese were forced to speak Japanese. They couldn't even speak their own language. And it's a very, very interesting island. Very interesting island. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, next is Sheila. Go ahead, Sheila.
Oh, hi, thank you very much. I'm sorry, I was called away, so I missed part of the program. But my question is, what is the political opinion of Koreans in the United States? The younger generation, older generation, if you have a sense of where they stand on North Korea. And also, I know you lived in the Bay Area for a while, and I'm wondering what you think of coverage of Korea on KPFA.
I'm not sure about the coverage of Korea and KPFA because it's been quite a while since I've like listened to it. I guess as regards to like Korean Americans' views, I think there's like a generational thing. I think maybe people that are like there were different waves of Korean migration to the United States, right? So the earlier waves, they tend to be much more conservative because they were frozen in the Cold War, right? So a lot of them are like staunchly anti-communist, right? Like my mother is like staunchly anti-communist, anti-North Korea, whatnot, right? Then I think you have maybe people that are like in their 40s, 40s and whatnot, 40s, 50s, maybe 30s, 40s, 50s, people that migrated like a little bit later into the United States, perhaps like after the IMF crisis in 97. A lot of these people tend to be a little bit more open-minded. And part of it is because this is kind of like the heyday of the democratization movement. This is like when there are moments of like anti-Americanism, when like due to like U.S. military war crimes, not U.S. The crimes of U.S. military soldiers, kind of like yeah, so it's generational, right? And then I would say um, maybe Korean Americans, second generation Korean Americans might be divided. I would say that there is a certain like progressive and left. For example, like Nodutol in New York is like clearly like a key center, a key locus or whatever focus in the United States, the KPI, right, with the various Korean Americans that are kind of like revolving around that. Different organizations, I think in many regards, Nodutol is one of the organizations that through its various exposure programs and all these things kind of created space to have like this kind of like progressive and left understanding of Korea and South Korea, North Korea, all that. So yeah, I would attribute a lot of the progressivism in the Korean American community to their efforts and to their historical efforts. You know, they've run programs for quite a long time.
Next is Raj, if you would ask your
Yeah,
question.
I have two questions. I see a unipolar moment being over, and I see multipolarity rising. Now, where it ends up, I don't know, but so I see Iran, Russia, and China are working together, and even India, which is sort of has a foot in each camp, is not siding with the US all the way. Now, so my two questions. One is, what keeps China from investing in North Korea? Because North Korea has that's why they were opening up. They were kind of feeling compelled with South to have investments. The South even made some investments in North Korea. And then all this politics changed. So what keeps, in your opinion, from China, which has a lot of capital and technology now, from investing into North Korea? So that's first question. Or is it happening? And I just don't know. The second question is, what is the role both Koreas are playing in this tension with Iran and Russia, relative to Ukraine, and with Iran relative to Israel? What can you tell us about both North and South Korea? Thank you.
Sure. Sorry, it's my it's a little bit hazy at this time of night. So let me just try to get it straight. I think like one is around like North Korea and Russia. Yes, I think the relations are becoming North Korea, as I understand it, has provided munitions to Russia, and Russia has provided like technology and various there's a type of trade, right, that is happening. Um and yeah, so there's that. I know that their alliances are also becoming much tighter. As regards to with South Korea, I know South Korea has sent it doesn't directly send weapons to Ukraine, but it has sent weapons to replenish the U.S. stockpile of munitions, which allows I mean, effectively, it's sending munitions to Ukraine, but it's just doing it by it's not directly sending it to Ukraine, but instead it's just replenishing the U.S. stockpiles that allows the U.S. to then send some of its munitions. So I think indirectly like that. I know that South Korea is sending weapons to Israel, like Hyundai. I think Hyundai is like involved in that. So yeah, there's definitely various efforts like divestment and protests and whatnot around like South Korea sending weapons to Israel. As regards to China, I think I think at some point the way that I understand it is that China and North Korea have this kind of relationship where um, China basically doesn't want North Korea to collapse because if it collapses, it's going to be a huge headache on its border, right? And it's also going to destabilize the region. So it does things that help it not collapse. But other than that, it wants to treat North Korea as like any other country, right? Meaning like economically, none of this kind of like, I don't know if solidarity kind of economy is the word, but perhaps that existed at a previous point. But I think as China, like there's a lot of reform and opening, they try to become more business and matter of fact with North Korea, right? Then I guess as regards to why it's not investing, I think the question might even be like, is North Korea like allowing that to happen, right? I know that like uh um I think like yeah, I guess my point is that North Korea is like very independent, a fiercely independent country. Um and as such, I think it doesn't like interference from anybody, right? Including China. Um, and who knows how it will navigate the current atmosphere or if it'll be forced to make a lot of compromises. But I think like I forget somebody asked about Chuche. Like I don't know all the tenets or whatever, but I know at the heart of it is this kind of like fierce nationalist independence, right? Self-determination to the utmost. Yeah.
Just if I may follow up, but the question is it because independence, or is it ideological that Chinese capital in exploiting labor under the conditions that it is willing to do is not acceptable? Is it ideological or just a question of independence? Because it was accepting capital investment from South Korea, which is also capitalist. So why would it have objection? Why would China interfere? Because China's policy is not to interfere with internal affairs. They just invest and make money or help whatever they do, the mutual benefit, as they say. Why can't this happen between China and North Korea in a big way? I mean,
Well,
maybe
I think
something.
like I think North Korea, I mean, part of its future philosophy is reunification, right? With South Korea. So that's part of the philosophy. So economic cooperation in that regard, like, is consistent with that, right? China, despite like this kind of like blood relationship that they had because of North Koreans fighting in the Chinese Civil War and the Chinese fighting in the Korean War, despite that, I think the thawing of the Cold War did change a lot of the relationship between North Korea and China, right? I guess your question is it ideological? I think it's more nationalist. I think it has more to do with understanding South Korea as having a special relationship with North Korea. And even whether it's like a blood relationship or whatnot with they don't see China as like, yeah, South Korea is just different. I mean, who knows? Maybe things have changed, you know, but for a long time, like North Korea's vision of independence is of a unified Korea, right? Of a strong unified Korea that is able to weather the influences and the interventions of other stronger countries around it, right?
Okay, thank you, Dae-Han. Everybody should know it's now approaching 4 o'clock in the morning for him, so I think we're going to let him go to sleep. Just a few last words. Keep an eye out on our website, icssmarks.org, for next week's program. On the 12th, we're going to have Jewish Voice for Peace. I would just make a quick comment that I just realized after what you said, Dae-Han, that I think there's a similar kind of a transition taking place among young Jews in the United States, that the older generation is kind of locked into Zionism, and the younger generation is clearly breaking away and spearheading the resistance to the genocide in Palestine. So this is something we should think about that's actually has broad implications. I wanted to thank you for bringing that up. On the 19th, again, a very, very important program. Danny Shaw, who after 17 years has been fired from his job at CUNY, New York, as a professor because of his outspoken support for Palestinians and the genocide and the war that's taking place in Palestine. So do come back and join us. You can sign up for our email notification list. And again, once again, I want to thank you so much for staying up all night to be with us, and a very, very informative presentation. We look forward to having you again. Maybe next time when you're in the States, we can
All right.
we can have you at a more decent time. So really appreciate it, Dae-Han. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much
Okay.
for listening to my presentation.
Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses. Since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums, please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, @yahoo.com, and the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.